As we start transitioning into fall, I'll definitely miss those bright sunny summer days, but I'm excited for the crisp air, cooler days, and the beautiful change of scenery that comes with the season. And that's exactly the feeling I wanted to capture in today's projects. Using the Windows to Stillness set from Altenew, I created two simple cards inspired by those quiet moments of enjoying nature from other side of the window. Now there's something so peaceful and refreshing about these cards. This video is part of the Altenew Educator Hop, and the theme of the hop is focal point. And of course, we have an exciting giveaway too. There's a total of $120 in prizes up for grabs. So don't forget to leave a comment on the video for your chance to win and hop along for more fun inspiration. Hello crafty friends, I'm Revati and I can't wait to show you how they came together. So let's dive right in. This is the Craft-A-Life Project Kit, Windows to Stillness, and I absolutely love everything about this set. It comes with a huge stamp set, a fun layering window die, coordinating stencils, and a beautiful textured embossing folder. And the best part, we'll be putting all of these pieces to use in today's projects, so let's get started. Now this is the Windows to Stillness stamp set. This is a huge 6x8 set, and you'll get these beautiful layered tree images that let you create a peaceful scene with just a few layers, along with the little details like drifting leaves that would really bring the scene to life. But what I especially love about this is the sentiments. Now, they have a very beautiful, calming, almost mindfulness inspired feel with messages like breathe, pause, slow down, and peace lives in small moments, and so many more. They fit the whole theme of this collection so perfectly. Now, the packaging includes the layering guide, so creating these serene little scenes is actually much more easier than it might look. It's such a beautiful stamp set for those cards where you want the design to feel peaceful, thoughtful, and just a little bit like a breath of fresh air. For my projects today, I decided to take a slightly different approach with these beautiful tree images. I stamped them using black pigment ink and then added some heat embossing, which gave the trees this gorgeous, crisp, almost silhouette like appearance. I really love how the simple technique makes the trees stand out while still keeping that peaceful, understated feel of the Windows to Stillness collection. Next, we have the coordinating stencils, and these are such a fun addition to this entire collection. They make it really easy to add beautiful layers of color and detail to your scenes without having to do a lot of masking or complicated techniques. I love how the stencils complement the stamped images and help create that feeling of looking through the window at a peaceful outdoor scene. You can use different ink colors to complement and completely change the mood of your background from soft and serene to warm and almost autumn like. For my projects today, I kept things fairly simple and used my stencils to build a subtle layer in the background, allowing those beautiful embossed three silhouettes to remain the main focal point of my projects. So there are three stencils included in the set, and each one is numbered as scene 1, scene 2, and scene 3. I really love this because with just this one set of stencils, you can create three completely different scenic backgrounds. It is such a simple way to get more versatility out of your stencils and create a variety of peaceful little landscapes for your cards. And then we have the layering window dies, which are such a fun part of this collection. These dies let you create beautiful window frames with multiple layers, giving your card a little bit of dimension and making it feel like you're actually looking through the window at the scene behind it. I especially love how the different pieces can be layered together to create a more detailed window while still keeping the overall design clean and elegant. It's a simple way to turn those scenic images into a really eye-catching focal point. Let's start by creating the focal point for our card, which is going to be this beautiful scenic background. I started with a white cardstock panel and placed it on my ultra sticky mat. For this card, I'm using scene number 2, which is again a two-layered stencil. Now, one thing I really love about these stencils is that they have etched labels indicating different elements like skies, mountains, and clouds. So it's really easy to figure out which colors go where. For my design, I am using only the rectangular portion of the stencil and skipping the little dome-shaped section at the top because I want my final scene to have a simple rectangular frame. Now I started with a sky layer and blended three beautiful shades of blue. We have Blueberry, Blue Horizon, and Ride the Wave. And since I wasn't using the dome shaped portion, I simply masked it off with some post-it tape and I went on with the ink blending. For the clouds, I went with the lightest shade of blue, which is blueberry, which gave me a really soft and subtle look against the darker background. Then for the mountain layer, I switched to some beautiful shades of green. I used reindeer moss, fresh leaf, and sugar kelp, blending the colors together to create a little bit of depth and dimension in our landscape. I really love how these colors came together to create this peaceful, almost dreamy little scenery. To remove my panel from the ultra sticky mat, I simply blend the mat away from the cardstock instead of trying to peel the paper directly off the surface. This little trick helps release the panel much more gently and keeps it as flat as possible without causing any folding or warping. Now that our stenciling is done, it's time to build our scene with some stamping. I was honestly a little torn about which of these beautiful tree images to use, but I finally decided on the one marked B1. Now I placed my panel into my stamp wheel and then brushed it with some anti-static powder. This helps make sure that the embossing powder will stick where you have the stamped image. I stamped the tree using obsidian black ink twice and then covered the image with some clear embossing powder by Altenew. When it came time to heat emboss, I gently warmed up my panel with my heat tool. One little tip to help prevent your cardstock from warping is to let your heat tool heat up completely before bringing it close to the paper. Then keep the heat tool moving continuously around the image rather than holding it in one spot for too long. And just like that, we have this beautiful, crisp tree silhouette that really brings out our peaceful little scene to life. I absolutely love how this image turned out, and keeping in line with my usual clean and simple style, I was really tempted to just leave this as is. Maybe add a few sequences here and there, a little sentiment strip, and we could call this card done. But then I decided to take it a step further and use the layering window dies to create a beautiful window frame around our scene. And I think it adds just the right amount of dimension while really bringing the whole looking through the window concept to life. For the window frame, I die cut the pieces from a very light shade of grey cardstock. I wanted to keep the color really subtle so that it wouldn't overpower our beautiful scenic background and would allow the trees to remain the star of the show. I think this one's the evening grey cardstock. You'll notice that I carefully centered the window die on my grey cardstock, and there's actually a reason for that. We'll be saving the negative piece because we are going to be creating our second card using that negative piece. I also die cut the outer frames using the same light gray cardstock. At this point, I was just experimenting with the different options, trying both the larger and the smaller frames to see which one works best with our scene. In the end, I decided to go with a smaller, thinner frame because I felt it complemented the design without taking away from the scenic background. I adhered the frame pieces on my stenciled panel using liquid glue. These pieces are really thin, so you could definitely use spray adhesive as well. But I personally prefer using liquid glue here because it gives me a little more wiggle room to adjust and make sure everything is perfectly aligned with the window and the background. I'm really loving how clean and simple this panel turned out. So I decided not to add too much more to it. I simply finished it off with a little sentiment strip that reads, "Nature has a way of healing." I thought the sentiment was absolutely perfect for the peaceful scene that we created. It complements the design beautifully without taking away from the focal point, and I love the whole card feels simple, calm, and serene. And with that, our card is done. All that's left to do is mount our finished panel onto a card base. I use the same light gray cardstock that I used for the window frame so that everything coordinates beautifully. Then, using some foam tape, I pop the panel onto the card base to give it that little bit of extra dimension because our card otherwise is super clean and simple. And I think this finishes off our clean and simple card perfectly. I had even thought of adding some sequences or gems on this, but later decided to leave it as is because I really love the clean and simple look on this design. With card number one complete, it's now time to move on to card number two. And for this one, I'm going to make use of some of the leftover pieces from our first card and few of my previous projects. Now, for the window frame, I'm using the same light gray cardstock that we used earlier. I also had a little scrap piece of cardstock where I've been practicing the stenciling and figuring out how I wanted my scene to look. You'll notice I made a little mistake with the dome shaped section at the top, which is why I never ended up using this piece for my first card. But since this was my very first attempt at creating the scenery with this step, I thought it would be perfect for experimenting and showing you that you can absolutely repurpose those practice pieces. I simply trimmed around the stencil scene, and before we start building our window frame, I decided to stamp one of the beautiful branches right across the scene to add a little more interest and dimension. I stamped this beautiful, dainty little branch across the scene using black pigment ink and then heat embossed it with clear embossing powder. I love how the crisp black silhouette stands out against our soft scenic background. With our silhouette in place, I wanted to bring out a little more color to what was otherwise a very simple scene. The stamp set does include coordinating leaves and foliage for this branch, but instead of stamping them, I decided to use the coordinating stencil. I bought in a shade magenta, which is this beautiful bright pink, and added those delicate leaves along the blue sky. I absolutely love that pop of pink contrasts against the black branch and the blue background. It adds just the right amount of color while still keeping the design clean and simple. Now that our scene is complete, it's time to work on the front panel and create a beautiful window frame. But don't forget the embossing folder that I showed you at the very beginning. We are finally going to put that to use. I'm using the Windows to Stillness 3D embossing folder to add a beautiful wall-like texture to our front panel. I placed the gray cardstock panel with the window opening already die cut inside the embossing folder and ran it through my die cutting machine. And because this is a 3D embossing folder, it creates this gorgeous, deeply etched texture with so much detail. I think this kind of subtle texture is going to work beautifully, not just for this card, but for so many different designs and styles. I wanted to give our window a little bit of glass-like feel, so I added a sheet of acetate behind the window opening. Since our front panel has quite a bit of texture on from the embossing folder, I decided to use liquid glue instead of my usual double-sided tape. I made sure to add enough adhesive around the edges to create a strong bond and keep the acetate securely attached to the embossed panel. I love how this little detail makes the window feel more realistic and really helps bring the whole concept together. Off camera, I went ahead and die cut the window frames using the same light gray cardstock. I decided to double up the thicker frame so that it gave me a little extra dimension and make it stand out against the embossed panel. And to add a little more contrast, I used industrial diamond, which is the darker shade of gray, on my thinner frame. I think this subtle difference in color really helps define the window frame while still keeping the overall design soft and monochromatic. Before adhering the frame pieces to our background, I made sure to completely assemble the window frame first. I used liquid glue to adhere all the layers together, which gave me a little bit of extra time to make sure everything was aligned properly. One little tip when working with acetate is to make sure you use very little glue. If the glue oozes out or squeezes out, it can leave visible marks on the acetate, and unfortunately, those are much more noticeable on clear surface than it would be on any regular cardstock. So, a light hand with glue is definitely way to go here. I kept placing my stencil panel behind the window frame as I worked just to make sure everything was still lining up perfectly. This also helped me check that all the little details I wanted to show through the windows were clearly visible and positioned exactly where I wanted them to be. I think this little step is definitely worth doing when creating a scene like this, especially when you want the window frame and the background to align seamlessly. To add a little extra dimension and lift to our card, I decided to add some foam tape to the back of the gray window panel. You'll notice I also added a little bit of liquid glue on top of the foam tape. This gives me a little bit of wiggle room so I can easily slide the stencil panel behind the window and make sure everything is perfectly aligned before the glue sets. I find this really helpful when working with layering stencils or even aligning things because it gives me a little more control over my final placement. And then all I had to do is place this panel onto my card base. Now, since my card front was gray, I decided to add a white card base instead of the gray. Also, you'll see that I did trim my gray card panel to measure 4 by 5 and quarter, which is slightly smaller than your regular A2 size card base. Just like we did with our first card, we could definitely just add a sentiment and call this one done as well. But I wanted to bring in a few more elements from the die set, so I decided to add a little window bench. I die cut the bench using the same light gray cardstock and then ink blended some dark shades of gray to add a little contrast and give it some dimension. And of course, our little bench wouldn't be complete without some cushions. So I cut the cushions from two shades of green cardstock and added a bit of shading using reindeer moss. This little touch of ink blending gives the cushions some depth and helps them stand out against the gray bench. I really love how these extra details make the window seal feel a little more cozy and inviting. I use some liquid glue to adhere both the cushions on either side of the window that lay flat on our scene, and for the little cushion in the center, I added some tiny little pieces of foam tape, and that completes our card front. And last but certainly not least, I finished the card with a little sentiment strip that reads, "Sending you breath of calm." I thought this was the perfect sentiment for our peaceful little window scene and such a beautiful way to bring the whole card together. And with that, both our peaceful window scenes are complete. I absolutely love how these cards turned out and how the set makes it so easy to create such calm and serene designs. I hope these projects inspired you to slow down and get creative and find a little moment of stillness in your day too. I'll be sure to link all the supplies that I used to create these cards in the description box below. Please note that all of those links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I'll get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Thank you again for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe.